Hello and welcome to Catamount Community Connection, your weekly public affairs program here at Catamount Radio. I'm Brian Collamore, your host for the 1 hour show. And each week, as you have been listening, we talk with community leaders from the business, professional, nonprofit, and political arenas. Our program is brought to you by the Rutland County Agricultural Society, which has brought you the Vermont State Fair at Rutland since 1846, believe it or not. And we're already looking forward to the 179th fair, which will be coming up in August of 2025. Very well attended fair, by the way, last year. And on behalf of the Agricultural Society, thank you everyone for attending. And we're hoping this year brings even more success to the Vermont State Fair. So today we are going to be chatting with Emilio Rosario, who is part of the Rutland City Police Department. His beat is the downtown beat, and we can talk in general terms about policing and also specifically maybe about the downtown area, since Emilio probably knows that area better than anyone else. And we're also very pleased to have on for the first time Ian Sullivan, who is the Rutland County State's Attorney. And as we traditionally do, Ian, when we have someone on for the first time, just to kind of let the audience know more about you, tell us about yourself, where you were born, where you grew up, how did you get to be the Rutland County State's Attorney, all that kind of thing, and welcome.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, Senator. I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm always happy for the opportunity to talk about the work we do in the criminal justice system, what we can do, what our limitations are, and I'm very, very happy. It's a tremendous privilege to be the state's attorney for Rutland County. It's a wonderful community that is very supportive of law enforcement and the work we do in the criminal justice system. I first came to work in Rutland back in 2015 as a deputy state's attorney. Before that, I had been in private practice for a little bit in Brattleboro, but I grew up in Jericho, Vermont, the child of a elementary school teacher and a nurse at the hospital, so trying to figure out ways forward to help people live better, safer lives is very much a part of my family's tradition, and it's something that, while I don't have the technical skills to be a nurse, I'm happy to do within the field of law. And I find trying cases to be a really immensely rewarding professional experience because you get to present your case to the community and see whether your case is up to the mark, whether you've presented a case in a way that is persuasive beyond a reasonable doubt to members of the community. And I think that is such a meaningful step because it isn't just the government deciding somebody's guilty, somebody's innocent. We've actually got to take our cases to the community when we're trying cases. And that is, I think, a really foundational protection of liberty within our society.
So I'm guessing, and I don't know the geography all that well up north, Jericho, you might have gone to CVU, to high school?
Never CVU.
Oh, MMU, my gosh.
MMU, yeah.
Okay, I picked the wrong one.
Fierce rivals, yeah. No, Mount Mansfield Union High School is the high school I went to.
Okay.
So that covers Jericho, Underhill, Richmond, kind of the western slopes of Mount Mansfield.
All right. And then law school, obviously.
Yeah, I went to college at UVM and then Vermont Law School. At UVM, I met my wife, who was one of the many, many students that come to UVM from somewhere other than Vermont. She fell in love with Vermont, and it was part of the package deal. She got to marry a Vermonter, too. I hope she'd have some other reasons, but, that might be the principal one.
Yeah. And interestingly, and I don't know because I didn't do enough research on this, you serve 4-year terms. You are an elected official. I should mention that right off, because maybe a lot of people don't know that all of our state's attorneys, Vermont has an interesting way to break things down. We are not organized very well on a county level, but this is one exception to that. There are 14 state's attorneys. Did I get the right plural? Yeah, state's attorneys in Vermont. And you serve, obviously, the Rutland County one. And then, so everybody else, I know from the governor on down to the justices of the peace, are all elected on 2-year terms. So it seems like after our first year, we're already running again kind of thing. You at least have the advantage of having a 4-year term, so you don't have to start worrying about it until the 3rd year. And I don't know what other offices statewide might be that way. I'm guessing maybe some of the side judges, maybe not. I don't know. But anyway, that's the way it's set up, right?
That's right. So I think sometimes it surprises people to learn that their prosecutors are elected. And that's in a really important way that the community weighs in on what they want the enforcement of our laws to look like. For example, the crime of driving under the influence of alcohol can be punished by up to 2 years in jail for a first offense. There are counties in Vermont, not Rutland, that send those cases to diversion, that don't have them go through the criminal justice system at all. And that's a decision that an elected prosecutor makes. Or you can have a county where they believe that driving under the influence is a crime that is really dangerous to the community and should be held accountable with a conviction for the crime that the legislature created. But those decisions within a discretionary space are why those elections matter so much. So even though we as the state's attorneys show up kind of far down on the ballot, it really makes a big impact on how our laws are actually enforced. We do have a 4-year term, and we have overlapping jurisdiction with the Attorney General's office, although the Attorney General is elected on a 2-year cycle. And where there's an overlap between federal and state law, we also overlap with the U.S. Attorney's Office. And sometimes, for example, drug crimes, firearms crimes, there can be an overlap between state and federal law where we will work with our partners at the U.S. Attorney's Office to try to figure out which place will provide a better fit, a more just response to the criminal behaviors.
Do you enjoy campaigning? I should ask you that right off the bat, I guess. I mean, I don't. It's sort of a weird thing to think of you standing out on a street corner with a sign that says elect Ian Sullivan and waving the way we do in the Senate and the House.
So I was first elected in November of 2022. Before I chose to run for office, I was a deputy, I was a line prosecutor, and in a lot of ways the idea of being political in any way as a prosecutor felt a little weird to me because the law is the law and we should enforce it to try to make our communities better. But going through the process of campaigning, I can't say I super enjoyed it, but I really came to appreciate that community buy-in matters in a democracy. And the way we do that is by getting out, talking to members of the community, listening to members of the community, and understanding the problems that they face in their everyday lives rather than being insulated from public opinion. So while I can't say I look forward to standing on a street corner in chilly weather waving, I do think it's important. And I wouldn't say I make myself do it, but it's not the space that I'm naturally most comfortable.
Okay, that's fair. And I don't think I was either. I just ran for and was elected to my 6th term in the Vermont Senate. So, I've got 10, 11 years here, and it's still a very humbling experience, I have to say that, to get out there. And, I mean, you're vulnerable, even if you're with a bunch of other people, which you normally are. Very few people do it alone. And when people drive by, they either give you a wave, a honk, a thumbs up, or in some cases they are expressing their disapproval in other gestures. And
also with a single digit, I would guess.
Yeah. So that's sort of like, when that happens, you think, geez, maybe I'm not that popular. You know what I mean? It's just sort of like, it's a weird feeling anyway. But I always kind of wondered, because your office is a little bit different, I think, than a local level with the mayor, the board of aldermen, the House members, the Senate members. It's a little bit, I don't want to say it's more dignified, but it just seems like it's a little bit less likely to be something that you really look forward to doing.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is we ask people for their votes as state's attorneys, people who we may have prosecuted, witnesses to horrible crimes, victims of horrible crimes, the police officers we work with. And like you said, it's a humbling experience, but that's a good thing because it reminds especially the people who are seeking elected office that this is human work, and it has to be human work where you treat people with dignity and respect even when they have done something wrong. That doesn't mean you're letting them off the hook, but it does mean that you try to approach your work in a way that doesn't deprive them of their humanity or unjustly vilifies them.
Okay. And we'll get back to maybe more specific things. Sure. I just have one more question, and then we're going to turn our attention to Officer Rosario. you each have a staff, I would assume, and a budget which comes down from someplace, probably the state. Are there more, and are they all deputies under you, or how does that set up? And is Chittenden County like more populated? Obviously it is. Sure. Do they have a bigger staff? How does that work out?
Yeah, so Vermont counties vary wildly in population size. You have places like Grand Isle and Essex County that actually have part-time state's attorneys, and they have a pretty small staff, mostly part-time people. And then you've got at the other end of the spectrum, Chittenden County with, I think they have either 14 or 15 deputies plus the elected. Rutland County has me and then 6 other prosecutors in the office, and then our administrative staff and victim advocates. And Rutland County is, of course, Vermont's second largest county, and we have a population density, and we have routes of travel that sometimes mean that people from out of state who are trying to offload drugs in Vermont are really concentrated here in Rutland. The whole Route 7 corridor on the way to Burlington experiences that. So not only do we have Vermont's second largest population, we do have a real concentration of Vermont's criminal problems.
Ian Sullivan is the voice you just heard. He is our Rutland County State's Attorney. You don't have to worry, folks. He's not running again until 26, if indeed he is then. And so you won't have to vote for him or worry about any of that stuff. Let's turn our attention to Emilio Rosario, who has been on a couple times before. Generally speaking, you come in with the chief, but he was doing some other stuff, I guess, at the time we were recording this. So it's great to have you back, first of all. Thank you for coming in. And I'll just open the microphone up, and you can talk about anything you want to talk about in terms of the policing effort that we have here.
Well, I think that one of our biggest things that we're trying to get done is trying to get some people to come work at the Rutland City Police Department. So, Brian, if you're feeling like froggy, come on over. We're trying to get some good people to work at the Rutland City Police Department. That is a task. Very hard to get people to want to be a policeman these days. I don't know why.
Well, I know why. It's very unfortunate the way things have turned out. But.
Yeah, but we're trying. We're putting our efforts forward. We've got a team of people that try to recruit new officers, but that has always been hard for us to do, is because the process is so long. Getting an officer off the ground and into the police car and on FTO is like a year, and then people leave, they decide they don't want to do this job anymore, and we're kind of left with, bare bones to work with. But, I got to say I'm happy that most of the officers are staying here in Rutland City, and I think the biggest reason why is the people here, right? Ian probably understands this. We've got a community that absolutely supports us, and it's great to see that. There's other communities not so far from here that don't support the police, right? I think that we are very lucky here in Rutland City because the people here truly do support us and, have our backs.
I know the mayor put in the budget for one additional officer, I think. You're within, I'm going to guess here, 4 or 5 being full, I think?
Yeah, we've had some leave, and we've got one in the pipeline right now. So, I think you're right. That sounds right.
Yeah.
But we're just pushing forward and trying to get some people on board and get our numbers up. But I think police in general are trying to do this.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just Rutland City having this problem.
Yeah, and to Emilio's point, it isn't like you just go down to Whale Street, knock on the door, and say, "I'd like to become a police officer." Right. Okay, here's the gun, here's the thing, here's your shield. Good luck. It's a 16-week process at the police academy, first of all, and there's some physical requirements, obviously psychological requirements too.
Absolutely.
And then there's just this process that you have to go through. Mm-hmm. And we talked with Chief Kilcullen last time about the issue of poaching. you find somebody, you spend, and it could be man or woman, and you spend time and money and effort involved to get them where they need to be. They got to be, I think, a level 1 to join, at least to do some of the duties. And then all of a sudden, someone taps them on the shoulder from either out of state or in state with another agency and says, hey, how'd you like to make 25% more than you are now?
Absolutely.
And so that must be tough.
I think it is. I think that is one of the main reasons that we lose policemen is because once we're full-time certified, we can go to any department, right? So, the Vermont State Police could say, hey, Emilio, we'd like you to join the Vermont State Police, and, we can offer you this. We can offer you a cruiser. There's a lot of different things that they can offer you. But, the city can offer some great things, too. I mean, we're out there every day responding to multiple calls. I still believe if you truly want to be a police officer and do police work, Rutland City is the place to be, right? Because you're going to be responding to everything, not just DUIs, domestics, homicides, everything. You're dealing with the broad array of the criminal aspect. And I think, Rutland City is the place to come if you want to learn how to be a police officer. So,
and again, not to blow smoke in your direction, we've known each other maybe a year and a half, 2 years. I think you're the perfect face for the Rutland City force. You're young, you're bright, you're a nice guy, and the interaction with you and the people that you serve, as far as I know, has always been exemplary. And you are able to de-escalate situations, I think, pretty easily because of your personality. So kudos to you. I think you're doing a great job.
Hey, thank you very much. I think that's, the number one thing in policing, right? You got to be able to talk to people. You got to be able to reason with them and kind of, put yourself on their level, right? The badge doesn't really mean anything if it doesn't mean anything to the person, right? So, I think that's the biggest thing with this job.
And it does warm my heart when I go by, and people still have the lawn signs up that says that we support the
I love those.
Rutland City Police Department. Yeah,
yep.
It's time to put them back up again if you've taken them down. We've seen, unfortunately, and everything seems to be operating in cycles. Of late, we've seen some bad stuff happen in our community, probably not involving people that have lived here for a long, long time either.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that we have been seeing, and I think it's happened for a long time, not just recently, but we're dealing with individuals who are not from Vermont, right? They come through, like kind of what Ian was hinting to earlier. We've got this route. There is a lot of drugs in this area, and we're having individuals that live in this entrenched, some have gang affiliations, and they're here to make a profit, right? Yep. And they're doing that, right? It's happening. I don't think anybody would, put their head under the blanket and say it's not happening. It is, but we're here and we're trying to prevent that, putting cases together and trying to stop, the way that these people live. They've come to Vermont and brought that to Vermont, brought that criminal element to Vermont. And I think we deal with a lot of people from out of state, honestly.
Yeah, I'll just hop in kind of quickly because, we on kind of policing and prosecution end of things, we get involved when everything's gone wrong. And we, of course, have to look at things from that perspective, right? When somebody's breaking the law, it's our obligation to do something about it. But we also have to recognize that sometimes the way out is broader than just making arrests. Making arrests, getting convictions, and appropriate jail sentences is, of course, a huge part of that. But getting people out of the cycle of using drugs, of stealing to support their habits, sometimes even being violent to support their drug use, those are all things that make our communities a less attractive place for drug dealers to try to sell their poison. And so that, obviously that is not something that we can do by ourselves, but it is something that will help that situation. Yeah, for sure. I know one way that doesn't work well, again, in my opinion, is what's happened in Burlington, and where you have, unfortunately, a climate, it seems up there, that does not support the police department as strongly as they should. You've got a state's attorney operating up there as well that may have a little bit different
opinion than most people in Rutland County in terms of making decisions about going forward with cases. But we noted that the police chief up there has just announced that he won't be coming back. And so there'll be, I'm sure, a very long and hopefully a successful search for a new person at the helm up there. But I think it does speak to the fact that, they went out of their way to, I don't want to say defund, but maybe that's not a bad word to use either. I think the community made a decision, and that's the problem with 100% of the people not voting. If you get only a 25% turnout, you're allowing that 25% to tell everybody else what to do. So we went through a period of time anyway where Burlington really, and I think it's still in very tough shape, and it's going to take some time for it to get turned around too.
Yeah, I agree.
So hopefully they'll find a nice, good, and it could be guy, gal, doesn't matter to me, someone that understands the process and the fact that you have to support your law enforcement and your state's attorneys and judges and everybody else. It has to be a holistic sort of thing that happens, that because people go where they think they can kind of get away with stuff, I guess, right? I mean, if you're in a situation, and again, you're coming up from, I guess, the I-91 corridor now is sort of infamous for being able to bring people from, 2 or 3 hours away into the state. And if you kind of take a look at the thing and say, ooh, I better not go there because they're pretty tough on it. That looks like a good place. And then so they go up there and then they get away with it kind of thing. And then that's the way things go.
Yeah. So my career before a police officer, I was actually a correctional officer. And it's funny that you bring that up because, I'd be sitting in the units and, individuals who have been incarcerated are in the units, and I've actually heard those conversations. Yeah. As I'm working, I'm hearing them say it's very easy to come to Vermont and sell drugs because of what happens with them. They kind of get a slap on the wrist, and I've heard that. I've heard them say that. So yes, I believe you're correct. And
I'll take some responsibility in this whole scenario of law enforcement. The adjudication system where we have state's attorneys and judges. The legislature is the other, maybe that three-legged stool. And so we've worked over the last few years to come up with legislation that tightens things up, that makes it a little bit easier for prosecution to happen when it should happen, and for, as Ian's point earlier, for treatment to also accompany that kind of thing. Because you can punish people all you want, but if you don't change the way they see life, you're not ever going to make a substantial change. So when we come back, and we do have to take our first break, maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the things that the legislature did do in the last session, and looking ahead, maybe some things that Ian Sullivan, our state's attorney, might say, if you took a look at this statute and tweaked it just a little bit here, we could make it even better. And then we want to go back, obviously, to Emilio as well to talk about how it affects things on the ground. And we will do that when we come back here on Catamount Community Connection. Welcome back to Catamount Community Connection. I'm Brian Collamore, your weekly host for the show, and it's brought to you again by the Rutland County Agricultural Society. And we're already looking forward to the fair, the Vermont State Fair at Rutland. It's been here since 1846, and very few years has it not actually happened. And we're looking forward already, so we want to talk about the ones that didn't, to the 179th fair, which will be coming up next August 2025. And again, today we're talking with Emilio Rosario from the Rutland City Police Department and Ian Sullivan, who is the Rutland County State's Attorney. And we explained a little bit about how that is all set up. And again, I don't think a lot of people knew. I would never have known until I got involved with the legislature that there were 14 of those folks statewide, that they're 4-year terms and they're elected. So the people in those communities decide who is going to make decisions in terms of going forward with prosecutorial cases. Last year, or the last term, the term is 2 years, the legislature did make some tweaks, I think, to some of the statutes. One of the things that we were hearing continually during our campaigns a term ago this year it was all about property taxes and affordability and getting everything back. But the one that we heard, the term before that was about public safety and how people were, I think, very legitimately concerned with the sort of catch and release situation, which occurred a lot, where someone would get cited by our police department and they'd go to court, and before, as people would like to say, before the ink was dry on that, they were back on the street. And can't you people do something up there? So I think we tried to do something. It's always a balancing act when you get involved with legislation. I know that all too well, where we'll make something a law, and then a year down the road it isn't working, and you got to go back and try to fix it by amending it. So I don't know whether you can point to specific things, Ian, that worked, and maybe some more work is needed on some stuff too.
Sure. I mean, from my perspective, 3 major things changed in the last legislative session, on shoplifting, on cars, and on bail. And for shoplifting, I think one of the really frustrating things for people who live and work or even shop in downtown areas is these kind of repeat cyclical retail thefts where people are coming in, they're hitting a store, and they're on the way out. And those cases, under Vermont law up until last year, anything under $900 was a misdemeanor crime. And that kind of dovetailed with a change the legislature made in 2018 to put a cap, a maximum amount on bail for $200 for certain types of lower level offenses, including shoplifting. So one of the frustrations that I heard loud and clear was that it just seems like these people who are never showing up at court and keep doing retail thefts, they just keep getting citations, or they get a $200 bail, and that's people are always like, why is it $200? Well, it's the way the laws are written, or were written up until last year. And the change in the shoplifting statute that we saw, and that I and the mayor of Rutland testified in support of, was to try to make a system where people could be held accountable to a higher level for repeat acts of retail theft, of shoplifting. Now, there's a couple of ways that could have happened, but what did end up happening is that there is an enhancement, meaning a higher penalty, if someone has been convicted in the past of this version of retail theft. Now, because it's a conviction, the whole court system, the full measure of due process has to play out before the enhancement kicks in. So that will take a little time to see how it's working. The next major area of change comes to cars. And here in Rutland City, Emilio can talk about this at length, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But the way our trespass statutes were written, there had to be either actual notice, meaning you tell somebody, hey, get off my lawn, or signs or placards designed to say you can't be here. The problem is most cars didn't have either of those things. So when people would leave their cars unlocked, and hey, Vermont's a rural place that is generally pretty safe, a lot of people do that, they were having their cars rifled through. And if we couldn't show that the person was actually stealing the change from the cup holder, we kind of didn't have a charge to file, even though everyone you ask would say, that person doesn't belong in my car. So the change we got out of this session was that there is a trespass to people's cars statute that went into effect. I also testified in support of that change. It's not a super high level offense. It's not equivalent to a murder or sexual assault, but it does allow the police to intercept that behavior and bring the person to court. That, to me, is significant because it is a way that the community expresses its values that this isn't okay. This isn't okay, and there needs to be accountability for it. And the third major change that we saw was a change to Vermont's bail laws. Bail is one of those things that I think is deeply misunderstood in the community at large. Bail under the Vermont and federal constitution is limited to a specific purpose, and that is to ensure that people show up, that they show up in court to face their prosecution, meaning we don't get to impose bail for public safety. It would be unconstitutional to do that. But as I mentioned earlier, in 2018, there was a bail law that capped bail, meaning there was a ceiling, a limit to how much bail could be imposed on low-level misdemeanors at $200. It didn't matter whether the person had showed up for court every single time or if they had never showed up, if they had failed to appear 50 times. $200 would be the cap on misdemeanor offenses. The change we saw in this most recent legislative session was to remove that cap if the person had pre-existing failures to appear or pre-existing dockets, meaning that when we are seeing people coming in and out of court again and again, we can ask for the bail that actually matches their risk of fleeing prosecution. So from my perspective, that's a positive change. There's no longer this artificial cap that means people who are a true flight risk can only have $200 bail imposed.
So again, excuse me, for a lot of people, myself included, there were few that understood the difference between conditions of release and bail. Sure. And people seem to think it's the same thing, and it's not. And Rutland County State's Attorney Ian Sullivan is absolutely correct that a judge cannot impose bail for public safety reasons. The only reason is if he or she is convinced that that defendant won't show up again. That's the only reason. So you've got some really violent crimes taking place, and the bail sort of, in most people's minds, didn't match what had happened. And so absent a constitutional change, that's what it would take. We'd have to actually open the Constitution up and change the bail law. We have to do it by means of the conditions of release provision, I think. Am I saying that right?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Conditions of release can be for public safety. Bail is about showing up for future appearances. There are some limited types of cases where we can argue to the judge that a person should be held without bail, meaning there is no amount of money they can post to get free up until their trial. And those are limited to two categories. One are life offenses, so things like murder, sexual assault, kidnapping. The other are felony crimes of violence where the person poses an ongoing risk of danger and there are no conditions or combination of conditions that can reasonably prevent that violence. So that tends to be things like armed robberies, aggravated domestic assault, things that are very serious felonies, include an act of violence, and usually some record that they did not engage in the court process or that they violated court orders. So in those two categories, life offenses and violent felonies, we can pursue a hold without bail order if the facts support it. So
it seems like what we did last year and the year before is helpful to some extent. And I don't know whether Emilio wants to weigh in or Ian, but it should result in fewer people doing bad stuff in terms of shoplifting and that kind of stuff. There should be fewer cases if what, in fact, was passed is working. What we don't want to ever have happen, and I know it's happened a couple times in Rutland, is one of the big box stores, and someone outside sees somebody walking out with a big, huge, big screen TV, for lack of something else, and it's obvious that the person didn't pay for it because the clerk's waving, and so the citizen steps in, and you know, it can get really violent, and the citizen really doesn't have any right to do that, although I can certainly understand the frustration watching, you know, somebody get away with another one, and their thought is, geez, the guy's probably got an apartment full of stolen stuff, and here he is out. And so, but that's not what we want. We want to make sure that the law is in place to help people make the right decisions, kind of thing. Is it? Are we on a good trajectory? Is it getting better?
You know, I think these crimes are still happening. I wouldn't say that this has stopped these crimes from happening. But I think it gives us a little more teeth when we do find these people doing this thing. So just kind of like what Ian said, I think this gives us some extra teeth to actually hold these people accountable for the multiple retail thefts, the multiple trespass, that type of stuff. I think it does help us. I can't say that it has stopped those because you know, right now we're on the uptick. So we've had a lot of retail thefts, and we're trying to keep ourselves very visible to the public, to the individuals walking in the plaza downtown. We do a directed patrol, which will be, you know, officers will rotate in and out of the plaza. So you might go to Walmart and you might see a Rutland City police car there with the blue lights on.
Yep.
You know, we're trying to deter that criminal element. from being out there, right? So we're trying to put all our pieces to the puzzle, in the spots where we can deter these individuals. And we have our population right now is there's a lot of people who are homeless and who are just trying to make it. So I understand, to a degree that they need things, and some of them are going to steal them. Yeah. So we need to be, in those areas to prevent that. So that's what we're kind of trying to do at the city PD.
Yeah, and this community is deeply caring. There are a lot of resources other than stealing.
Absolutely.
So while people might be in dire straits, that is not their only option, and they can take advantage of other resources as well. One of the things we see is that things like retail theft and unlawful trespassing, there's a wide range of people and histories committing those offenses. Mm-hmm. We can and should take radically different approaches to the 22-year-old who's never been in trouble with the law, who steals some makeup or a six-pack, and then I can think of a handful of people who were on their 20th cycle of retail thefts, and we do take a very different, more punitive approach to them. And we've had probably half a dozen people who are just extraordinarily high flyers on the number of offenses they're committing. And those people, we've tried a number of things as those charges accumulate, but it can end up at the point where they are serving a somewhat lengthy sentence with the Department of Corrections. And the change that can make when one of these high flyers stops committing crimes, either because they're rehabilitated or because they're incapacitated, means the police can focus on kind of higher level crimes where people are hurt, where people are injured, where there are major property losses. Obviously, if people are rehabilitated, that means when they get out of jail, we won't be seeing them back again, and that's a really good outcome. But even stopping kind of the madness of these repeat crimes is a really meaningful step.
Yeah, I don't know if it was the mayor or maybe it was Brian Collamore. I don't remember who it was, but there's a statistic that a certain percentage of the crimes that involve the retail theft and those sort of, I don't want to lessen them, but the minor sort of misdemeanors that go along with it, if you could, and I don't know what that percentage was, but it seemed like it was just very few people account for like 80% of what's going on. So if you can change their behavior, you've in effect really made a lot of progress on it. Mm-hmm. And I don't know what that number is. I forget, but it seems like that's what we're talking about. We're going to take another break in a few minutes. But I want to give Ian another shot. If you were in my position, and I won't necessarily be in the judiciary committees this coming term, but if there were a couple of other tweaks that you might see as being really helpful and beneficial in your world, I'd love to hear about them, and maybe we can go to work on them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the changes I would like to see is on firearms, and I know that is a hot button topic, and I'm not proposing the sort of boutique crimes that have passed the last few years, but right now Vermont's law around people who are prohibited from having a firearm is actually a pretty short list. It's not even every felon who is prohibited from having a firearm under Vermont law. They're prohibited under federal law, which means if a felon has a firearm and a local police officer catches them and it's not on Vermont's pretty limited list, we've got to beg ATF, we've got to beg the U.S. Attorney's Office to do something about it because we are powerless to act. Where the federal law is a little bit broader is that it's all felonies, and people who are habitual drug users, whether they are convicted of a felony or not, are prohibited from having a firearm, and people with the type of mental health issues that lead to an adjudication, meaning they were charged with a crime but found not competent to stand trial, or they were found not guilty by reason of insanity, they're prohibited from having a firearm. And those three categories, from my perspective, are folks who shouldn't have guns. They shouldn't have guns, and we, on the state level, should have an ability to do it so that if Emilio sees somebody who was, say, charged with murder, was found not competent, and the Department of Mental Health released them into the community with a sidearm on them, he could do something. He could do something before the bullets start flying, and that's a meaningful improvement for public safety that I would love to see passed.
Okay, so now I've got to ask you a question. normally federal law trumps state law. So I'm not clear if it's already under federal law that a felon cannot possess a firearm. Why is it not that way in Vermont?
Sure. So it is a question of enforcement. Who can enforce? What resources are available?
Okay.
So there's a lot more state and municipal police officers than there are federal officers. Also true with prosecutors. So there's a question of resources. And for us in our local communities, when somebody's posing a risk of harm, even if they haven't drawn their firearm to use it, if they shouldn't have it, I would love to be able to do something about that.
Okay. Well, it's something that perhaps either Senate or House Judiciary Committee can take up. I have a feeling I know a couple of those folks from Rutland County who will be on the House Judiciary Committee, and we can certainly talk about that with them. Anything else that you can think of?
Yeah, and one other feature of Vermont law on being a prohibited person in possession of a firearm is it's a misdemeanor under Vermont law. So it's a relatively low-level offense. In the federal system, it's a really serious offense that people can and do go to jail for quite a while if the federal government has the resources to prosecute them. So I think there's a real mismatch between the danger that's perceived by the law as it exists right now in the state and the potential penalties. You could imagine some changes to that as well.
Okay. I know Emilio wanted to talk, too, about drug court and some of the things that are happening there. And I think it was our own Senator Peg Flory, along with one of our more illustrious judges once upon a time, Frank McCaffrey, that came up with the idea for that. And it seems to be working very well. Judge, now I'm going to space on his name. Who's the local guy that runs the drug court? Trying to think. I should know.
Judge Valenti was
running. Yes, of course. John Valenti, yes.
With the most recent judicial rotation, there's now a statewide treatment court judge, Judge Kevin Griffin.
Okay. Well, from everything I heard about John Valenti's work, it was, again, just absolutely perfect. And a lot of good came out of decisions that were made. So when we come back after this break, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the drug court and how it's working, and then any sort of closing thoughts that either Ian Sullivan, our Rutland County State's Attorney, or Emilio Rosario from the Rutland City Police Department might have. And we'll be back on Catamount Community Connection in just a minute. We are back on Catamount Community Connection, and this week we're talking with Rutland Police Officer Emilio Rosario and Ian Sullivan, who is the Rutland County State's Attorney and won't be up for re-election again until 2026, if indeed he chooses to run again. And we started to talk about, and I guess, people change terms to best suit what's really going on. I mentioned court or drug court when we took our break, and that was what it was called back when it started. And obviously with the meaning of drug court, most of the people that were involved had some substance abuse issues, and that's what it's about. I guess we call it treatment court now, and that's fine, whatever people want to call it. I think the objective is pretty much the same thing. And I mentioned Judge Valenti. I didn't realize that we'd had a rotation and he wasn't with us anymore. I don't mean he's not with us. I mean he's not doing treatment court anymore. John's still with us. So, I think it affects both of your jobs. Mm-hmm. To me, it seems like if you can not just deal with the symptom of someone's issue, but the actual cause of it, the actual reason that they have to be in a situation that they are, you could save a lot of money by not having to do a lot of other stuff down the road. It's sort of looking upstream again and sort of trying to find a solution right away. So I don't know who wants to grab the football first and run with it, but
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
I mean, I'm obviously a prosecutor. I believe in jail. I believe that jail can be the right solution to some problems. But I also know that when crime is driven by something like substance use disorder, what we used to call addiction, that is something that doesn't necessarily go away just because someone's in a jail cell. And if it doesn't go away because they're in a jail cell, when they're released into the community, which, for most drug crimes will happen, it will happen either in the short term or in the long term. When they're back in the community, if the underlying problem is still there, they're going to get arrested again. They're going to keep stealing. because they've got to feed the substance use disorder. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I recognize that as the reality. So the kind of underlying idea of treatment court is that it is a structured, highly rigorous program that is really more intrusive into the participants' lives than being on probation, sometimes even more invasive than being on furlough with the Department of Corrections. They've got to see the judge every 2 weeks. They've got regular case staffing, and they've got to do regular and randomized drug testing to ensure that they actually are on the straight and narrow. And their performance in the treatment court either means they get a really lenient outcome if they're successful, or if they are not successful, they get the traditional criminal justice outcome, which is a jail sentence, and usually a jail sentence measured in years. So that it's a stark contrast between being successful if they achieve a lasting and durable sobriety, or if they kind of continue on the path they were on, they end up in jail, and usually for a number of years. So I see that as an opportunity to try to build a community that is sober, that is ready to be a productive member of society. And in a lot of ways, that is one of the most meaningful and positive public safety outcomes we can achieve when someone's crimes are driven by substance use disorder. But the day-to-day part, we are super lucky to have a lot of partners who are trying super hard to help these people achieve that lasting and durable sobriety. And a feature that Rutland County has that certainly not every treatment court has is a really active and supportive police department and police officers. That might be a little counterintuitive to some people, that by having the police present with people who have not lived a particularly law-abiding life, that it can actually help them live a better, more productive life. And Emilio is that officer, and he might not be willing to toot his own horn, but I'll do a little bit of it for him. Because he's the downtown beat officer, he is always in the areas where most of the drug court participants spend their time. So they see him day in and day out in a way that they can't always schedule.
True.
Which is a good deterrent, right?
Yes,
that is a good deterrent.
Yeah.
And as you can probably hear from talking to Emilio, he's a really friendly, outgoing guy who's deeply invested in the lives of people who he's interacting with. And for a number of these participants, that might be the first time that a person in a position of authority is really cheering for them to succeed, is willing to sometimes give them a lift, sometimes buy them a cup of coffee, and hear the challenges they're facing that day. So while a lot of really good things happen in the courtroom and with the case managers, we have this kind of force multiplier in the commitment the Rutland City Police have made to this program. And that commitment runs pretty deep. These treatment court sessions, there's the people who have to be there because it's their job, like Emilio, like my deputy who's there, like the judge. But we also have other stakeholders from the community who are showing up because they support it. That runs to some of the local reps, some of the local senators from time to time. And really a regular fixture in treatment court is the Rutland City Chief, Brian Collamore, and the Rutland City Mayor will drop in occasionally as well. Not because they're listening for a specific case, but because they are trying to show support that these people can achieve sobriety, and that by achieving sobriety, it'll be a benefit for them and the community at large.
Okay, now it's up to you, Emilio.
I don't think I can top that. I'll tell you that much. Ian, you're getting really good at public speaking. So I'll just jump in a little bit and describe kind of what we do. So I was tasked with being a team member of the treatment court team. Since I've started this mission, I call it a mission, right? Because we're always working on this, right? I think I have seen some amazing things happen, some truly amazing things that you wouldn't see, by being on patrol. And you make an arrest, you write up your paperwork, you send it to the state's attorney's office, right? They do what they need to do with it. Either the person serves time in jail, they go to trial, whatever happens. These changes that we are seeing, even if the outcome in the end, the person falls back down and ends up being, back into their addiction. the things that we see just for the time that they're in treatment court is outweighs, I think, most of the punishments. I don't want to say punishments, but jail time, because not only are we giving them support and they're able to change their lives, we're actually seeing, so we deal with an individual 13 times in a week, right? This individual gets into treatment court, right? We put him in the treatment court and we have not talked to him at all. He's doing good. Yeah. He's sober. Like, even if that doesn't last forever, the Rutland City Police Department and all our, resources that are being spent on this individual, arresting him numerous times for these misdemeanor petty crimes, when we put people there that care about the person and try to make it a mission to get this individual clean, it really works, and I've seen it work. I've seen people graduate, and it's amazing. Like, it honestly is eye-opening, and I think people in the public should come to these treatment court. It's open court, right, yep. Ian?
Yep.
So it's open court. People can come to the treatment court and see what we do there. It honestly makes a huge change in people's lives, and I'm not just saying that. I've been on the other end where we've arrested people, and it's just this cycle, this ongoing cycle, over and over and over again. If we've got the opportunity and the means to help someone and then see them succeed, like, that is, that's top notch. I think that's great, and I think that we've done that here in Rutland. We just went to a training by All Rise for treatment court on best new practices and stuff like that. Ian was actually there, and it just feels good when people are like, "Hey, Rutland is leading the way." Right? I think we're one of the only counties that has a police officer assigned to treatment court, and I believe that it actually is making a difference, a huge difference. So that's kind of how I feel about treatment court. I don't want to sound like all gloomy about, I was talking about gangs and drugs and stuff like that. And I agree with Ian. If we could get our community sober or on that way to sobriety, I think that these crimes that you are seeing, that are pretty significant, would start to fade, because we don't have that need for that drug, and that with that you get violent crime. Yeah. So I think if we could stop a couple people from doing that, people that have been doing it nonstop, and we've been dealing with a lot, I think it's huge, Ian.
Yeah, I'm responsible for kind of our systematic response, but every one of our cases, there are real live people attached to, and I think it's important for the police, for us, for the courts to remember that these are people's lives, both the victims of crime and people perpetrating them. And I keep coming back to one of our treatment court participants who told us about kind of first being introduced to drug use as a teenager, and it almost seemed like she never really had a chance up until, for the accumulation of criminal liability she had, kind of, I don't want to say forced, but made it seem like a good option to go into treatment court. And I live in this community too. I took my kids to a trunk or treat on Center Street, and I saw her. She had graduated from the program. She was sober. She was working. She was with her kids, trying to raise them the best she could. And seeing somebody who's like fully engaged in a law-abiding life as a productive member of society, that's an outcome that for that one life matters so immensely, and it ripples out to the whole community.
I agree 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if I can, because Judge Valenti and I have talked about this, so it's the stick or the carrot, and he's a perfect person to sort of talk to somebody about the options that they have, the choices they make. And he leans heavily, obviously, to the carrot one. He doesn't like to use the stick if he doesn't have to. And I have found in my life, if you can talk to someone and get their buy-in to do it, you have a much better success rate than if you're just yelling and hollering all the time.
Yeah, no doubt. The yelling and hollering does matter. We've got plenty of cases where that is absolutely what's needed. But Judge Valenti was we've had a number of really wonderful judges, but having somebody who is so enmeshed in the local community, when a participant says, hey, I got a job at the cracker factory, Judge Valenti would know what the shift hours were, who the supervisors were. He's like, I'm going to forget the supervisor's name, but like, I know John. John's going to be on you. You better let him know that you've got to be at treatment at this time. And that, I think, really let participants know that a person in a position of authority, right, like a judge up on a bench with the black robe, cared deeply about their success.
Yep.
And that, for folks who haven't had a lot of success in life, that's so meaningful. It can be transformative. It's not going to work for everybody. And for the people it doesn't work for, we've got the other door that leads right to a jail cell. Right. And that's an option too. I'd rather see people succeed, but I've got to know that it's not going to work for everybody.
So we have about a minute left. I don't know if either of you have any closing comments you want to make. Feel free. I hope we can have you back again. We try to get as many opportunities for people to speak to issues, and I think for the most part, the people listening really enjoy hearing about this. And so if either of you have anything more you want to add, now's the time.
So we do have a downtown sector meeting. The Rutland City Police Department, our chief makes everyone do a sector meeting. I know that downtowns is coming up December 2nd at 6 p.m., and it's going to be at the church on Strongs Avenue, the Methodist Church. So 6 p.m., December 2nd. Will be that sector meeting. If people want to come down and give their thoughts or just listen, we'll be there.
All right. Well, let's hope you find some more officers, too.
Yeah. Brian, come on over, man.
And I'll very quickly echo back to something you said earlier, Senator, which is, we do live in a democracy, and that requires a lot of everyone. If you don't like the way the state is going, or you do like the way the state is going, participating in elections, reaching out to your electeds, and on a kind of hyper-local level, being engaged in the jury process when you get that jury summons, that is a way that our democracy works. When we see elections where people don't show up, when we see jury selection where people just don't care enough to be engaged in their civic life, that erodes the quality of our democracy. So show up, be engaged, let your electeds know what you think should be happening.
Yeah, for sure. The thing that always irritates me the most, the loudest complainer always seems, and I say, did you vote? Well, no. Well, then you really don't have any standing, in my view, to be complaining about anything. Get out and vote. It doesn't cost you money. It used to when we had a poll tax, but not anymore. All right, listen, hey, thanks both of you. Ian Sullivan, Rutland County State's Attorney, and Emilio Rosario from the Rutland City Police Department. Really appreciate your taking time out to be with us today, and hopefully we'll have you both back.
Thanks, man.
Thank you very much.
And we'll see all of you next week on Catamount Community Connection.